The Cardinals offense is on the up and up with Kyler Murray back fully healthy, Trey McBride coming off a breakout season, and the addition of rookie sensation Marvin Harrison Jr. We dig into all thing Cardinals 2024 fantasy outlook on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer, and I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL fantasy betting for sportingnews.com. Excited to get to our fourth team in the NFC West on today's show.
Yes, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. We are going through all 32 NFL teams. Each team gets their full episode talking all things about their upcoming fantasy outlook, right, with all their big players. So we've gone through every team in the NFC West now except for the Arizona Cardinals. So we're going to get to them today, recapping the 2023 Cardinals season. It wasn't pretty, right? I mean, they were one of the worst teams in the NFL, also one of the worst offenses at 24th in the NFL in points per game scored. They ranked 23rd in fantasy points per game. However, Kyler Murray didn't come back and play until week 10. So there was 8 games of Josh Dobbs starting, a brutal game with Clayton Tune starting. But we saw Trey McBride, the tight end, break out in the middle of late last season. He led the teams in targets, receptions, and receiving yards. You still had old man James Conner averaging the 4th most scrimmage yards in the league among running backs. And then because they were so bad this last year, they got the 4th overall pick, so they were able to draft Marvin Harrison Jr. And then they also took another running back in the 3rd round. So lots to talk about today. Let's get into the veteran stars on this team and Kyler Murray and Trey McBride. Kyler Murray right now is going as quarterback 10 in fantasy points per game. Listen, is that just way too low for him? Because I feel like we're forgetting about how good he is just because of the ACL tear.
Yeah, we have to see him kind of run the way that we're used to him running. Of course, he was still a little tentative. He's been a little bit adamant about wanting to be a pocket passer, but come on, like Kyler Murray's dynamic value is running around. I mean, that's important to his passing as well. I think they need to get back to that a little bit where he is that early, like year 2 form of Kyler Murray where he's running and takes off when he wants to and just work that into the offense where he's just not doing this off scrambles. So now that really comes down to it. Is he willing? Are the Cardinals able to get him going on the ground here? I think this is an important element of his game. So if he doesn't give you that the way you want, then he's not going to be QB 10 because that's a big part of why he was a high scoring QB here. So I think you have to weigh it here. Where are your best values for these type of quarterbacks? You have Lamar Jackson. You've got Anthony Richardson. You've got Jaden Daniels now in the mix in this type of player. I mean, I wouldn't say that all of a sudden you'll have Justin Herbert running around like crazy with Greg Roman, but again, these are some guys that you'll have to consider at some point versus Kyler Murray. So again, is he going to give you that cheat code floor of running? That's the big thing we have to determine first. And then we have to explore what is his passing upside? He's got an improved receiving core, of course, with Marvin Harrison Jr. Is this going to be a passing offense? Drew Petzing came from Cleveland, which was run heavy and all that. And are they going to be good enough to execute around it?
You know what? I'm not too worried about Kyler Murray stopping the running, right? Like maybe he's not going to be, he's going to be looking to pass before he runs, but that's always how he's been. He's still going to scramble when he's in trouble. He's still going to get those rushing yards. He's still going to score some rushing touchdowns. I'm just looking at his entire career here, and in 2020, he was a quarterback 5 in points per game. In 2021, he was a quarterback 4 in fantasy points per game. And quarterback 7, if you just look at the season, it was quarterback 7 in points per game if you're just looking at it. But if you just take out the game where he tore his ACL, he had 1 pass attempt, right? Like that counts against his points per game. You just take that one game out, he averaged over 20 fantasy points per game in 2022, well on his way to another top 5 fantasy season. So it's every year this dude has played. He's a top 5 guy. Even last year at his worst year coming back in the middle of the season, right? Coming off an ACL tear. He hadn't played in full year, he still averaged quarterback 10 in fantasy points per game. Like, he is so safe to me with so much upside. It does confuse me how a guy like Anthony Richardson is going so far ahead. Like, Richardson's going as the quarterback 6 off the board while Murray's going 10, or even like a CJ Stroud guy going so far ahead of Murray. It's like, we've seen Murray do it over and over and over again. We have not seen these guys be top 5 fantasy quarterbacks yet. And also with Richardson, we really haven't seen him at all. So there is no world where I'm taking Anthony Richardson at 52nd overall over just waiting for Kyler Murray another round and a half later.
Yeah, it's obviously the new shiny toy, recency bias, who's been on the field more, who's exciting. Those are all going to come into play, and you got to exploit that in your drafts because you don't want to fall into that trap and just say, I'm going to take this hyped rookie or hyped second year player. Just go for the values. That's what you're looking for at quarterback, especially at quarterback, because there's so many values and there's not a lot of difference in scoring. And if you can operate for a couple rounds, stack your team at other positions, come back and get a quarterback and not really lose value, that's what you're looking for. So we're always looking for that player. And Kyler Murray at his value right now is very good, as Michelle said. I think the running, I just wanted to throw it out there. I think he will run. I think they're going to say, you have to do this a little bit, right? This is part of your skill set and asset. Don't shy away from it. So it's really fitting where he falls after Lamar Jackson.
Now, moving on to tight end Trey McBride, right? He completely breaks out last season, led the team, like I mentioned, in targets, reception, and receiving yards. But that breakout didn't come until after they shipped out Zach Ertz, until Kyler Murray came back. So, like, weeks 10 through 18 is really when he shined. He ranked second among all tight ends in receptions from weeks 10 through 18, third in receiving yards, first in first down receptions among all tight ends during that span. So he looked really, really impressive out there. However, he got so many targets, right? Because there's no one else there. So from weeks 10 through 18 with Murray back, and when McBride got 66 targets, the next closest guy was Greg Dortch at 39. The next closest guy after that was Rondell Moore at 29. So do you think Marvin Harrison joining this team, does that hurt McBride's upside, or do you think it helps him at all?
I think it actually does a little bit of both. And I'll explain that. I think it helps him in the fact that there's someone to draw attention now, that he's not the only guy. But it does hurt where he's not going to be the alpha in targets. He's not going to just get peppered the same way he was last year. So what's going to happen is that Trey McBride has got to be more efficient. He's got to position himself well in the red zone to get some cheap points that way by scores. If he's going to see less targets and catches and yards, that would say, okay, he's got to score a little bit more. You should see favorable coverage. The key for him right now is to make sure that he's second on the team in targets, and by a good margin here behind Marvin Harrison, because you got, again, Michael Wilson, you got now Zay Jones in the mix. You have these other guys that are more spread around these wide receivers. So McBride, if he can still be 2 on the team in targets and bump up just his kind of early usage, which he didn't have last year with Ertz there, I think he'll be fine. I just think it doesn't really change the fact to me he's a top 5 tight end. I'll just say that. I mean, he's just in too good of a situation, and Harrison's going to help open it up. And I think you'll see those touchdowns and a little bit more field stretching that make up for those fewer targets.
Yeah, that's really what's going to have to come down to. He's going to have to catch a lot more touchdowns, because even in the second half of last year when he was going off in targets and receptions, still only the tight end 5 in fantasy points per game from weeks 10 through 18. And it's because he wasn't scoring enough touchdowns. I do think, like you mentioned, Marvin Harrison Jr. should help with that, right? They should be moving the ball more. There should be more scoring opportunities. So I think they kind of weigh each other out, balance each other out, and it'll be okay. I'm really high on McBride as well as a top 5 tight end, but he's going right now as the tight end 3. Can you see him being a top 3 tight end? Is that price too steep for him? Because I think it might be. It's a little pricey.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Sam Laporta going first, and then you have Travis Kelce in a lot of drafts, and Mark Andrews. So these are the guys that you're weighing him with for the most part.
I also
George
think
Kittle.
Dalton Kincaid should be in that conversation, and Kincaid is going, around after him. Do we think Kincaid or McBride has a higher ceiling or safer floor this year?
Well, I think you look at the situation in Buffalo, I think the vacated targets line up a little bit better with that team for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, they still have a question mark behind really everybody, if you look at it, Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, those are the guys he's competing against. Well, you do have a clear alpha here. So it's the vacated targets. I think there's 100 difference here. So there are a lot to go around. But again, if Harrison swallows up a good chunk of those, Jones and Wilson get some, then you're seeing maybe a kind of a static place here for McBride, but maybe a bump up here for Kincaid. Maybe they anticipate again moving Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis in Buffalo, and Kincaid is kind of a hybrid wide receiver to them, where I think McBride is pretty much a straight up tight end, the traditional guy that we see here. So again, I do want to be careful about overdrafting this guy. I think a lot of what he did last year really tied to just being the only option, and that's not going to be close to the case this year.
Yeah. I think I'm leaning with a more Kincaid side. I think once I would look
Yeah.
into the numbers more with McBride, I'm a little bit more worried about his overall upside, but I still think he's going to have a very nice fantasy season. And it's nice to have all these options, these young guys and Laporte and McBride and Kincaid. Like finally, right? The tight end
Yeah.
position's looking a bit exciting.
Yeah, for sure. And there's going to be a changing regard soon. I mean, Kelsey's extended, but I don't think there's going to be too much more there. So again, the days of Kelsey just dominating this position might be over, which is a good thing for all of us in fantasy. And we will talk more about that prized possession, Marvin Harrison Jr., in our next segment. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by Yahoo Finance. We're looking to be the smartest investor out there, and it'd be great if you could see all your investment and retirement accounts in one place to make that easier. With Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis you need to tend to your entire portfolio with confidence. Let's get straight to the point. You want to grow your portfolio to deal with the rising cost of inflation, pay off your debt or your mortgage, pretty much anything standing in the way of you and financial freedom, right? Well, with Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, and tools that you need in order to help reach that financial freedom. Whether you're a seasoned investor looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They're the number one finance destination for a reason, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. With a community of more than 90 million users each month, the real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor. That's yahoofinance.com, your number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. All right, Michelle, here's an exciting part of the show. The Cardinals' shiny new toy, the league's shiny new toy, Marvin Harrison Jr. First, let's start with it. He's ranked at wide receiver 10. Does he have a top 5 ceiling, however, in his rookie season?
You know what? I cannot remember being this excited about a wide receiver coming out of school ever, right? If you just watching him, it's with ease, right? Just he does everything with ease, but then looking at his stats, I mean, those back it up as well, right? Over the last 2 seasons, he's led the FBS in yards per reception and in receiving touchdowns at 28, but his yards per reception being at 17.2, insane, average nearly 100 receiving yards per game over the last 2 years. He's going to be amazing, right? The top 2 wide receivers for the Cardinals from last year in targets, they're gone. Marquise Brown led the Cardinals wide receivers with 101 targets. Rondell Moore was traded to Atlanta. He was second among the Cardinals wide receivers at 62. As we mentioned, Trey McBride led the team. I don't think he's going to do that again. And we've seen year after year after year now, rookie wide receivers put up big numbers, right? There's at least one every year. You had Puka Nacua, wide receiver 7 last year. Jamar Chase, wide receiver 5 in 2021. Justin Jefferson, wide receiver 9 in 2020. Juju, wide receiver 13 in 2017. Michael Thomas, wide receiver 8 in 2016. Like the list goes on and on. Nowadays, you don't have to wait for these guys to break out. And I fully expect Marvin Harrison Jr. to have a massive monster rookie season.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Puka Nacua last year, and let's just start there. That's where we're looking at with his numbers. And can he get there? I think absolutely he could. I mean, it's really reasonable. It sounds crazy, but I also think the biggest difference is I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to score more touchdowns. Puka had 6, which is pretty solid, but You look at the catches, 105, 1,486 yards. So I actually think all these things are within reach for Marvin Harrison. As scary and as exciting as it sounds, I mean, if he gets the targets, I mean, they're going to have to throw to him in a lot of situations. He's a hard guy to cover here. So I think you might actually see his price go up from wide receiver 10. There's just so much hype around it at this point, but I think it's deserved. I mean, if you look at the way he played, he just makes everything look so easy. It reminds me of when Julio Jones and AJ Green came in. Like, I knew right away, just get on those guys. They're going to be great for fantasy right away. They're going to be good for a long time. This is the type of talent and pedigree this guy has. So, again, I'm looking at this. I'm just going to have fun with this catch line here. I'm going to say he has 88 catches only because he makes a lot of big plays. And he's going to crack, to me, 1,300 receiving yards and at least 8 touchdowns. So I'm going to start with that. I mean, 88, of course, a nod to his dad's number.
I didn't predict his receptions yet, but I do think he has over 1,400 receiving yards, and I do also have him at 8 receiving touchdowns. So I think that's a fair number for him. I think he could score more, but those touchdowns can be so finicky. Doing it as a rookie is not easy. So I think 1,408 is fair for him. We've seen now 3 rookie wide receivers hit 1,400 receiving yards over the last 4 seasons. So it's been happening, especially with the 17 games. Unless there's just a terrible connection between Murray and Harrison Jr. I don't really see how it doesn't happen because there's really no other wide receivers on this team. So Michael Wilson, Zay Jones, Greg Dortch, do any of them interest you in taking in late in drafts? Wilson's going as wide receiver 65, 152nd overall. That's the next closest one to Marvin Harrison Jr., which is kind of crazy. I will say, though, even at the wide receiver 65 spot, there's still guys around him that I'd rather have. I'd rather take a shot on, like Josh Downs or Rashid Shaheed, or even I don't know, Darnell Mooney. I don't know if Michael Wilson will be on any of my teams.
Yeah, he's really hard to draft. Right now, if you look at their 11 personnel, this is who would start with Harrison. You have Michael Wilson and then Greg Dortch. But they also have Zay Jones. They have Zach Pascal hanging around on the roster. And they also have Chris Moore. He's kind of been a utility guy for the Texans and Titans. So these are the guys that they're picking from. I don't know if there's much difference. I think Zay Jones eventually could compete for that outside job with Michael Wilson. That creates a few problems, right? Zay Jones has started at that spot opposite the alpha there for the Jaguars. So if that happens, then you're splitting those, and then Dortch and some of these other receivers could split the slot. Pascal's played in the slot as well. Then you're looking at committees to fill out the rest of these positions. I have no interest at all in any of these receivers. I mean, they're just not consistent. I think Wilson, he has potential, but I didn't see enough of him last year to say I'm going to go there. I think I need to wait and see on the waiver wire if Harrison and McBride get going. Then, here's single coverage, easy coverage for this third receiver. Then they'll get going. But keep in mind, Petzing comes from the Browns, run heavy. I don't know if you're going to have all the targets to go around when you look at the running game and then Kyler Murray scrambling.
Yeah, I think if I'm going to take a shot on any of these guys in the late rounds, it would only be in best ball in like 18 round, 20 round pick. And that would be Zay Jones, right? Like with my last pick, because at that point you're choosing between him or Elijah Moore or OBJ or Brendan Rice. Like those are guys going around there. Like Zay Jones could have a couple big games this year with big arm Kyler Murray making a deep ball, right? So like in best ball, when you don't have to be starting, setting a lineup, you could get those few good games out of Zay Jones, whatever those may be. They're going to be too hard to predict. But that would be one guy I'd be considering. But when looking at this group, I am all in on Marvin Harrison Jr. though. If I can grab him in my drafts, I will. If you were staring at Garrett Wilson or Marvin Harrison Jr., which one would you take at the back there in the first round?
Yeah, it would be difficult for me looking at Garrett Wilson, how productive he was with those bad quarterbacks last year. I would say it's slightly Wilson. I mean, slightly. I've seen Wilson, and he's awesome. And with Aaron Rodgers, I think it's a little bit more consistency that you'll get. And he still is a dominant number one. I know you like Mike Williams and Malachi Corley, but Garrett Wilson is still a dominant number one on his team as well.
I love Garrett Wilson, but I think I'd go with Marvin Harrison Jr.
I mean, it's a good debate. Yeah, for sure. I mean,
It's very, very
look,
close. What one more? AJ Brown or Marvin Harrison Jr.?
yeah, that situation, I'm going Marvin Harrison because again, this just keeps discounting Devonta Smith. Like he's involved a lot. They both got paid equally. That showed their worth in Philadelphia. But again, not much has changed there. I think we'll see what we'll see from the Eagles. We've seen that kind of operate. It's a little different offense with Kellen Moore, which I actually think will hurt them because you'll have more passes to the running backs, actually. So I'm looking at Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah. And then like somehow right now, Harrison is still going one spot behind Devontae Adams. I don't expect that to hold up once we get to draft season, but I think most people would rather have Harrison than Devontae Adams at his age with the random
Yeah.
quarterbacks that he could be starting with the Raiders. So I think we see Harrison's price even go up, but I think it's fair and I think he's worth it. We're going to get into the Cardinals running back situation. James Conner, who shockingly did very, very well last year. Again, that man just always, when he's on the field, he's good, right? And then they brought in Trey Benson as a rookie. We will talk about their fantasy outlook for the 2024 season in our final segment. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by the Game Time app. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you'll have. Any event I'm going to, doesn't matter, baseball game, football game, comedy show, like I'm going onto that Game Time app because I know they are by far the easiest app to use, and I've always been able to trust them. Never had any issues. It was always smooth sailing. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're set. And you don't have to like dig through your email or anything. They're just sent directly to your phone. Tickets are super easy to find. Take the guessing work out of buying tickets with Game Time. All you have to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I know, Vinny, you're not very high on James Conner, right? I feel like I'm a little bit higher on him, but I understand your worries. He's keeps getting older. He's always hurt. He's not made it through a season, one single season in his career. He's never played more than 15 games, right? Missed 4 games each of the last 2 years, but he was the running back 10 in fantasy points per game last year. Actually, running back 6 from the time weeks 10 through 18 with Kyler Murray. He had the 4th most scrimmage yards per game among running backs last year and absolutely killed it over the last 5 games of the season. Average 100 and nearly 130 scrimmage yards per game from weeks 13 through 18. Like, just he was a monster. But do you think he can hold on to that with Murray back? Do you think he has anything left, or do you think Trey Benson steals a good chunk of work this year?
Well, if we think Kyler Murray is going to run, that's going to definitely cut into the process here. I know Josh Dobbs was a little bit mobile and was out there, but he was not the runner that Kyler Murray is and can just take off and do his thing when needed. But I think the biggest concern here is Trey Benson. Now, I think James Conner's probably a little bit past the typical expiration date for a banged up running back of his volume, really, when you go back to Pittsburgh and Arizona. I mean, it's been piling up here. And they've used him quite a bit. There was one year where they had the split backfield that kind of rest him a bit. But really, he's put on a lot of work here of late. So, I mean, you use a pretty high pick. I mean, keep in mind, no running back went in the first round. So you use the 3rd round pick on Trey Benson. He's another Cam Akers situation, the guy that maybe underachieved a little bit at Florida State, but had showed the talent if you had the blocking and the support that you knew that he could be more effective. And what bothers me about Trey Benson is that he does a lot of things that James Conner does well in terms of the running style. I do not like that. I prefer a back that's a little bit different. So you go in that direction and it's more of a complimentary back. But Trey Benson, yeah, I don't like James Conner. I just can't back him. He's an older running back. He goes against my entire well-being of a fantasy manager. I can't go for the old running back when I'm staring at a pretty talented back that the team drafted. So again, I think you're going to be disappointed here with the Conner. I mean, there's no way he finishes that high he's really been exceptional. He had the one big TD year. He has now had a complete season, but yeah, it's going to be cut into quite a bit. I don't trust him to stay healthy. I'd much rather have Trey Benson as a bit of a high lottery ticket value.
I will say, I do think James Conner's price is very, very fair, right? He's going as RB24, 79th overall. He's going behind guys like David Montgomery and Zamir White. So at the point where you're thinking about taking Conner, it's choosing him or Javonte Williams. I would rather have Conner, choosing him or Tony Pollard, him or Jalen Warren, like easily Conner over those guys for me. And then there's Zach Moss. Zach Moss is just going to be on all my teams. So, but like I do think Conner's value is very fair. Well, Trey Benson, he's going running back 32. It is a good like 20 picks after James Conner, but still not like super late. I just think we see this every year where we get excited about the rookies and the veteran always keeps their job. It doesn't even matter if the guy's like, we saw Jonathan Taylor wasn't even going to get on that field, I feel like, until like the injury. I mean, I know the injury was like in week 1 or 2, but like like these guys have such a hard time getting on the field when there's a veteran in front of them. He's going to need a James Conner injury. It will happen, right? It just depends on how severe the injury is and how long Conner is gone for in any particular time if Trey Benson can take over. But maybe you just take both if like you waited on running backs.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah.
Or you just
I mean,
the backfield
I will
altogether.
take you back to a situation, though, that it was Cleveland related. So I will bring that up with the backfield. I think this could end up being the Carlos Hyde, Nick Chubb thing. Like everyone was like going to Carlos Hyde a little bit, but you knew how good Nick Chubb was. And what did Nick Chubb do? He had that one game where I think he had like 3 carries, but 2 of them were long touchdowns. They were like, okay, we're done with Carlos Hyde.
It
We're
took
done.
them till like week 8 though to move on.
Yeah,
And I
but
will say Nick
that's my
Chubb
point, though.
Nick Chubb is a much better, like a much
yes.
better
Nick Chubb is
running
probably much better overall running back, and it was a threat.
I
But
think my
Carlos Hyde
issue is I
also,
wasn't very high in Trey Benson coming out of
yeah,
school. I don't love
yeah.
him. I
I
think he would
just
be
think his style
fine.
of runner, though, is the kind of like Browns type guy that Petzing would look at, and that's my concern here with James Conner. So, I mean, just because they moved on. Keep in mind, this is a new GM, Monty Osenfort. He hasn't really drafted his own running back, so this is a thing that they're looking at with Petzing and Jonathan Gannon in mind. So keep that in mind. So I just, again, this situation I've seen a few times. I just don't think Conner is that good. And you mentioned all those guys. I think I would take everyone that you mentioned, David Montgomery and Jalen Warren and all these guys, Zamir White. So I don't know. Maybe I'm a James Conner hater, but
I
again,
think you
I
are.
think I'm more an ageist at running back, and I'm always going to say, can I get a better value with the rookie? It may not work out, but really, if I'm stretching for this, I think you might have the best plan for them all. Just wait. Don't take Conner even that high, and stack both of these guys and hope that you have the best situation here. Because it's clear we know Conner's the number 1 for now. Benson's the number 2. There's not much question about that. So at least it's a little bit of a defined running back situation to look at.
Yeah, whoever gets the main carries on this team, and it will be Conner for a while. But like if he gets an injury and then Benson comes in, they're going to be good for fantasy, right? And James Conner is a very good running back. So you take that back. He's fantastic.
Yeah,
He has
he's
been his
good.
whole career. And I've been fighting for him since his days with the Steelers. I love James Conner. But yeah, he might be on some of my teams. We'll see how it plays out. Maybe you just kind of avoid running backs in this area altogether because maybe it's the running back dead zone that we all fear so much. But that is it for today's show. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every day is we're going to end the week tomorrow on Friday with a recap of the NFC West. So we're going to pit these players against each other in the NFC West, position by position, and start ranking them. And, it'll be a fun time. And then we'll even give you our predictions of how the NFC West standings will look at the end of the 2024 season. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.